Recent headlines claim that the BBC have been spreading misinformation and factually incorrect reports on climate change. Welcome to Riks Europe, Andrew Montford, Director for Net Zero Watch.
Hello.
Could you start off by telling us about this organisation, Net Zero Watch? What is it you do?
Net Zero Watch is a campaigning organisation. We question, if you like, mainstream narratives about climate change and particularly decarbonisation. For 10, 20 years now, we've had a story that we face climate catastrophe and that the only way to deal with this is decarbonisation, and we question those assumptions.
And it's to my understanding that you've been critical to the BBC in terms of how they've been reporting on climate change. Could you tell us why you've been critical?
The BBC has been at the centre of the climate change decarbonisation narrative, if you like, for 20 years. We've been watching them very closely since we were set up 10 and 15 years ago now. The BBC has staffed the correspondence that it hands the climate and decarbonisation agenda to are really not experts in their field. They are activists. So the BBC has been promoting this idea of climate crisis and the need for renewables, which are at best debatable and probably outright false.
And it's been revealed that there's been over 30 cases of misinformation. Is there any particular reports that have stood out that really have been misleading?
So every year we publish a report reviewing the BBC's output on particularly on climate change over the previous year. This year we picked 30 of the worst examples, but this is not. This is just the surface of the problem. Almost every time the BBC discusses climate change on air, it is getting things wrong, or it is just completely misleading people. So very common ones are to put out the idea that the world is seeing an increase in hurricane activity. That's a very common one. And it isn't true. The official science from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that there hasn't been an increase in hurricanes. But if you ask any BBC viewer, well, they will think there is because they've been told there is for 15 years now. That's also true of floods, that's true of droughts, that's true of tornadoes. I mean, some of the stories the BBC tells are completely ridiculous. There's a wonderful story in this year's report about a woman who was bitten by a crocodile in Indonesia, and the BBC tried to claim this was something to do with climate change. It's so preposterous. They are desperate to link anything to climate change that they can because it helps the narrative along. Another ridiculous story was there was a rare bird seen in the south of England. It's called a black-winged stilt. And they said its range had been changed by climate change, and so now we were going to see these birds in the UK all the time. But in fact, these birds had been seen in the UK since the 18th century, and probably before that as well. The first recorded example was from 1760 something. So the BBC are misleading people here, and I think this needs to be understood. The BBC has what they've done is they only allow people who promote this narrative on air. People like myself who question it. We never get invited on because it will destroy the narrative of doom. It's a profoundly political project in my view, but it's also quasi-religious. The BBC sees this as something that has to be done regardless of the costs. And that's not a rational way of looking at things. That's what Net Zero Watch is about. We're about trying to bring rationality back to the climate and energy debate.
I have several questions prepared, but one simple question there is why is this narrative so important for the mainstream media? Who is pushing for this narrative?
It's the thing that I have said in recent years, I think I've started to understand what is going on. The narrative of fear that was put out by scientists because it was good for them as scientists, because it brought in funding if they were dealing with questions that were about the future of the world and the future of mankind, that has grown now until it has become a quasi-religion. So anybody who questions that narrative now is treated in the same way that medieval Christians treated heretics. You are absolutely cancelled. You're sidelined. You're not allowed to speak. You are portrayed as a bad person. So the BBC, I don't think they are consciously doing something wrong. They believe that what they're doing is right and the best thing to do. They think they are saving the planet. In reality, the best thing for the planet is for society, for the public, to talk about these issues in a rational way. But rationality has gone from the climate debate now. We only have this thing of, the planet is burning and we need to build some wind farms. And this is such a ridiculous way of looking at what is a very complicated problem.
And what would you say are the dangers in this misinformation? Because in Sweden, for example, we have an expression, climate anxiety, klimatångest, and this is very common, especially amongst young people. Of course, Sweden is famous for Greta Thunberg, of course, who is the sort of poster girl for climate activism in Sweden, and so in Sweden it is important to people, but there is also, as you mentioned, a lack of rationality where it becomes a part of young people's mental health, where they feel doom and fear and worry about the future. Is this part of the dangers of this misinformation that Net Zero are concerned about?
Yes, and there are great dangers from the road we're taking. It isn't just harm to children. It's because we're doing things in an irrational way without any regard to the cost. We're potentially taking society and our civilization to very, very dangerous places. I mean, these things have happened before. You can think about perhaps fascism in the 20th century, where society went off in an irrational direction and very bad things happened. It was the same for communism. There is a real risk to our economy now. Certainly in the UK, we've gone very big on renewables. We've seen electricity prices doubling. That was even before the war in Ukraine. Electricity prices are doubling. Our manufacturing industry, therefore, has been closed and moved to the Far East. That's really bad for our economy. People now are worried about heating their homes in a way that they just weren't 20 years ago. So the dangers of irrational policy are very broad, and I don't think people yet realize how serious this could be. We have a new government here in the UK who are going very big on renewable energy, and they don't care that many of the issues haven't been resolved in a technological way. So, when the wind isn't blowing, where do we get our electricity from? Nobody knows, but the government doesn't actually really care because they're being irrational, and they just say, well, we need to build renewables and the problems will resolve themselves. This is going to end very badly in the UK, and I imagine in any other country where a similar road is followed.
And something you mentioned earlier was experts versus activists. And the simple question would be, what's the difference? And it seems like there's a simple answer. However, a lot of activists are at the forefront of the debate, and their viewpoints are taken very seriously. So how does the public know who to listen to in regards to this question?
I think the public needs to make sure that they are hearing all sides of the debate. and they need to demand to hear all sides of the debate. So anybody in the UK who relies on the BBC should, I think, have a sense that they are only hearing one side of the argument, because the BBC only allows one side of the argument to be heard. And to be fair, it's not just the BBC. It is quite a lot of the print media as well. But there are, some news stations that we have here, and one or two of the newspapers still allow dissenting views to be heard. So that's quite important. I think the other thing people need to insist on is that they should reject anybody who is trying to cancel the other side. So if somebody is saying, no, you mustn't listen to them, they are evil or bad or wrong or stupid, then you probably need to be quite cautious. Rational people discuss facts and data. If you're calling people names and demeaning them, you're not engaged in rational debate, and you can probably be safely ignored.
Thank you very much, Andrew Montford, Director for Net Zero Watch.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.
Good.